And what I'm going to do is walk through some of these chapters, showing you some of the images that are in the book. I got color this time, so it's really exciting. And then I'm going to read some of the passages that are in the reflections that follow each one of these chapters that are mostly in the spiritual frame of mind. And while I'm reading, some people have told me that they like it when what I'm reading is on the screen. They like to follow the words. And some people think it's really distracting to follow the words. So if you just want to hear the words, close your eyes, look at your feet or something. But it's up to you. Okay, so chapter 1 is the origins of the Earth, where of course we start with the Big Bang and go up to galaxies, stars, forming new kinds of atoms, our star, and the planet Earth. And in this chapter, I point out that when I first learned about this story in physics class when I was in college, the whole thing really freaked me out. It was too big or too little, or I couldn't relate to it. It made me very uncomfortable. And at the time, there was a physicist named Steven Weinberg who said, the more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it seems pointless. Okay, so here's my reflection on that axis that you can read or not read. But since then, I have found a way to defeat the nihilism that lurks in the infinite and the infinitesimal. I've come to understand that I can deflect the apparent pointlessness of it all by realizing that I don't need to seek a point in any of it. Instead, I can see it as the locus of mystery. The mystery of why there is anything at all rather than nothing. The mystery of where the laws of physics came from. The mystery of why the universe seems so strange. Mystery inherently shrouded in its own absence of category, its own absence of an answer. Mystery generates wonder, and wonder generates awe. The gasp can terrify, or the gasp can emancipate. As I dwell within cosmic and quantum mystery, I wander back through the centuries and encounter the essence of Lao Tzu, 600 BC. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of 10,000 things. Ever desireless, one could see the mystery. Ever desiring, one sees the manifestations. These two spring from the same source, but differ in name. This appears as darkness. Darkness within darkness, the gate to all mystery. Okay, see how I'm going to do this? All right, chapter 2, origins of life. So the favorite place for people who think about the origins of life as to where it emerged is in these deep sea vents where water goes down into the middle, it's very hot and comes through, and even modern deep sea vents, one finds lots of small organic molecules like sugars. And so the idea is that this activity generated these small molecules, and these small molecules then started to be incorporated into the first life forms. So on the upper right, the sugars are shown as little diamonds and ovals and squares. And what is being shown is that if we start with the diamonds on the bottom, two diamonds get together to form a molecule called C. And C serves as a catalyst, a word that says that is going to make the reaction go faster. It serves as a catalyst so that the two ovals can get together and form A. So that plus is a catalysis sign. And then A can catalyze the squares to form B. B catalyzes the diamonds to go to C, and you get this cycle. What's important in the cycle, what's important in the catalysis, is the shapes. So we're just making diamonds because we don't know what they were, but the point is that it is the shapes that get together, form chemical bonds, and create new shapes that are the catalyst. And the lower part just extends this with classier looking molecules, but it's basically the same idea that you have substrates that are forming catalysts. But in addition, the triangular catalyst has another thing that it can do. It can self-assemble and put all the little catalysts and substrates inside itself to use for future reference. And indeed, this autogen, as it's called by its authors, can, if it makes enough of itself, it can make two of them. It can replicate. So we have here then a very important phenomenon or term that I use throughout the book called emergence. So emergent properties refers to the shapes. When the atoms get together, they form shapes that are nothing but atoms, but there's something else. They also have a topology. And similarly, once you get this cycle going, we have what's called emergent dynamics. Something is happening, something is going that didn't happen before. So there are these two emergent properties and emergent dynamics that are the basis for life. The origin of life has long been considered a miracle wrought by gods or God or spirits. Now life can be understood as the perhaps inevitable consequence of our entangled thermal and chemical context, our planetary matrix, that fostered and continues to foster life's emergent properties and emergent dynamics. Miracle, from the Latin miraculum, in fact means an object of wonder. We could gasp in wonder at the miraculous origin of life without the need to invoke supernatural design or agency. Each life form is a self, and each self has aims, has a purpose, to self-maintain, self-protect, self-repair, and self-reproduce. In many religious contexts, purpose is spelled with a capital P, as in what is the purpose of my life. The religious naturalist instead joins East Asian indigenous traditions in dwelling with a lowercase understanding of purpose. The exuberant, purposive dynamics that spring forth from every creature, every self, and infuse our every moment. So the catalysts in the cartoons were just squares, but the catalysts that operate in all modern beings are almost always proteins. And they also fold and make shapes, and it's their shapes that determine their functions. So at the top, on the top, there's a portion of an antibody molecule interacting in the lower part with a portion of the coronavirus spike protein. And this interaction between these two shapes then triggers the immune response, or hoped for immune response. Below we have a real enzyme, although not drawn to scale, that's taking two real sugars, not little triangles, and forging them together to make a larger sugar in a process called biosynthesis. And in all creatures, there are thousands of different kinds of enzymes that work together, collaborate to do biosynthesis, to make new things. And here is a diagram of what's going on in every one of your cells. This is how we roll. Every single one of these pathways is catalyzed by a group of enzymes that are making all of the components of our bodies. We're told that life is so many manifestations of biochemistry, and we shudder, a long existential shudder. And then we defend, we dig in our heels and say, no, that can't be all it is. That does to life what astrophysics does to the night sky. Life reduced to its component molecules is life demeaned. Stop saying things like that. For me, a helpful way to think about reductionism is to invoke what we can call the Mozart metaphor. A Mozart piano sonata is a wondrous thing, beautiful beyond belief, sonorous, resonant, transporting. But it's also about notes and piano keys. Mozart's magnificent brain conceived the work, to be sure. He then transcribed it into black specks on white paper to be translated into strings hit by tiny hammers to create vibrations heard by ears. We can thrill to a sonata without giving a thought to its notes, but we can also open up a score and follow the notes, or play them ourselves, without having the music diminished or demeaned. It is another way of experiencing the whole, and indeed the only way to have a full understanding of what the sonata entails, and what Mozart had in his mind. And later, the notes are hammered by the piano keys and out flows the emergent sonata. Our attention might focus downward on the genome sequence of a wild rose, and then shift upward to take in some beautiful flowers, and then go back down to the cytoplasmic compartment swollen with red pigment to give the petals their flush. We reduce, and then we synthesize, and then we find another occasion to reduce. How did Mozart generate that modulation into B flat? Ah, with that chord. How lovely. So there are two kinds of organisms on our modern planet. Upper left is an amoeba, single-celled organisms, and single-celled organisms are by far the most abundant on the planet. But we're more enamored perhaps with multicellular organisms like our cells, so the bottom is a sea urchin embryo in its 4-cell stage. And a very important thing that proteins do, that all cells utilize, is that they display on their outer surface proteins that are called receptors. So we have a cartoon of a receptor in a nose. That's an olfactory receptor, and a little odorant, a little blue odorant is fitting into a shape. And once it fits in, the receptor changes its shape, which opens up, and we will see a little cavity on the inside of the cell. And the green protein, a green molecule can then fit into that. And that part is acting as an enzyme and changes the shape of the green circle so it now has little ears. And this cascade of response mediated by this receptor eventually goes to the brain, and we, as humans, perceive the odor, which, as you know, takes half a second. And so a huge amount is going on very, very rapidly and beautifully. I have come to understand that the self, myself, is inherently sacred by virtue of its own improbability, its own miracle, its own emergence. I start with my egg cell, one of 400,000 in my mother's ovaries, each one of them different. It meets with one of the hundreds of millions of different kinds of sperm cells produced each day by my father. Astonishing that I happen at all, truly astonishing. And then I cleave. I implanted her uterus. I grow tiny fetal kidneys and a tiny heart. The genes of my father and the genes of my mother switch on and off and on again in all sorts of combinations, all sorts of chords and tempos to create something both eminently human and eminently new. Once I am bored, my unfinished brain slowly completes its maturation in the context of my unfolding experience. And during my quest to understand what it is to be a person, I understand that there can be but one me. And so I lift up my head, and I bear my own witness with affection and tenderness and respect. And in so doing, I sanctify myself with my own grace. To the extent that I know myself, I am known. Any yearnings to be capital K known are relegated to the corridors of arrogance. And I sing my own song with profound gratitude for my existence. How evolution works. So we start with the planetary matrix that began to form itself about 4.7 billion years ago. And it took about 1 billion years before it was in a configuration that we could even imagine that life forms such as our little autogen could have formed. But somewhere around 3.7 billion years ago, the first life form showed up somehow. And then it started to evolve. It started to make changes so that it could better self-repair, self-maintain, and so on, the things that it needs to do. And most of those ideas were duds. But what we know is that one idea just kept going and going and going until we reach the blue guy that's called the LUCA. And the LUCA stands for the last universal common ancestor. So called because the modern organisms on the planet, the archaea, the eukaryotes, and the bacteria, all have the LUCA as their common ancestor. And we know this because these three kinds of organisms all have the same kinds of components. They all have DNA, protein, membranes, same kinds of metabolism. So we can extract, we can go back and say the LUCA therefore must have had all of that stuff also. So the two first branches, the bacteria, you're familiar with, the archaea, maybe not so much, but they're little tiny single-celled guys too. And somewhere along the line, archaea and bacteria fused together to form a new kind of cell originally, that then went on to evolve into the eukaryotic lineage. And that's our lineage. So here's a diagram of the evolutionary tree. So the LUCA would be right there in the center. The eukaryotes have been all smooshed together in about 5 o'clock, that green finger. They're all in one piece. And we're looking at the radiation of the archaea and of the bacteria, which clearly was an explosive and incredibly important thing. Bacteria are key to all life on Earth. And here we have the evolution of the eukaryotes. So the bacteria and the archaea are down there at 5 o'clock. And what we have are the four major groups of eukaryotes: the protists, the plants, the animals, and the fungi. And I don't know why this slide is blurry, but anyway, up there at the top where it says animals, there's a little thing saying you are here. And down there, that part has been blown up, you are here. And then over on the right, you are here, where it's pointing to Homo sapiens. And there are 2 rodents on one side and 2 amphibians on the other. And the LUCA is then again in the center. So incredible diversity in the eukaryotes and a source of humility.
Yes.
I walk through the woods and the creatures are everywhere, seen and unseen, flying about or pushing through the soil or rummaging under the leaf litter, adapting and interacting and reproducing. I open my senses to them and we connect. I don't need to anthropomorphize them, nor to value them because they are beautiful or amusing or needed for my survival. I see them as they are. I understand how they work. I think about their genes switching on and off, their cells dividing and differentiating in pace with my own, homologous to my own. I take in the sycamore by the river and I think about its story, the ancient versions of algae and mosses and ferns that came before, the tiny first life form that gave rise to it and to me. I try to guess why it looks the way it does, why the leaves are so serrated and the bark so white, and imagine all sorts of answers, all manner of selections and adaptations that have yielded this tree to existence, and hence to my experience. Blessed be the tie that binds. It anchors us. We are embedded in the great story of biological evolution, the spare, elegant process of mutation and selection and bricolage. And this means that we are anything but alone. And then the beautiful poem, Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear petals of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. So then there's awareness. So this original origin may or may not have been aware of its surroundings, but very soon life forms, and certainly all modern life forms, are aware of their surroundings, not only their physical surroundings, but of each other, same species, different species. And this awareness is mediated by these receptors that we looked at earlier. In the animal lineage, awareness came to be dominated by a particular kind of cell called the neuron, which collaborates to form brains. So all animals have brains, and I would say that all animals are conscious. And this consciousness is mediated by the cerebellum, which has clearly gotten a lot bigger in us. And along the way, the ability to have this I self, this sense of the yada yada, emerged during the evolution of the human, and is probably deeply embedded in our ability to use symbolic language and to form narratives. And what's interesting about the I self is that no matter how many times I tell you that it comes from the brain, it doesn't feel that way. It feels immaterial, right? And this is a reflection on that fact. As a non-theistic religious naturalist, I call upon the concept of emergence, something else from nothing but, to help me understand the widespread sense that humans have immaterial souls that can interact with immaterial spirits and continue their existence after their death of the body. The emergentist approach suggests that to experience our experience without perceiving its underlying material mechanisms, neural hormonal collaborations, is the kind of thing we might expect of emergent dynamics. While the outcome has been given reverent names like spirit or soul, names that conjure up the apparent absence of materiality, we need not interpret this as evidence of some parallel immaterial world. We can now say that the experience of soul or spirit as immaterial is a reflection of the way that the process of emergence distances each new level from the details below. Given such understandings, I have no qualms about referring to my sense of myself as my soul. A soul emergent from material and biological complexity, a soul that will die when my body dies, but nonetheless a soul provisioned with endless opportunities for what some call immanent experience and others describe as a fullness, an overwhelming richness. The concept that these experiences entail access to some independent spiritual realm doesn't resonate with me, whereas to think of the mystical dimension as emergent from my mind and heart makes it all the more wondrous and exciting to be a human. I am called to access the mysticism inherent in my participation in the planetary matrix. So not only are our brains aware, they also interpret what they're aware of, and they also have feelings about what they're aware of, emotions. All of this is done by the brain in collaboration with many organs in the rest of the body, and even with our bacterial biome plays a part in having these experiences. A feeling state that accompanies most religious frames of mind is variously known as empathy, compassion, humaneness, or loving kindness. The ability to imagine what it is like for another being to feel distress, the ability to put oneself in another's shoes and experience their distress as one's own, in one's own being, and the impulse to help ameliorate that distress. Empathy has deep roots. Versions of empathy have often been witnessed in other mammals and in birds, and are particularly evident in non-human apes. A young bonobo was observed to fatally injure a bird while playing with it. She picked up the comatose body, carried it with her to the top of a tree, and opened out her hand. When the bird still lay there limply, she wrapped her legs around the tree trunk, held the bird by its wings, and then opened and closed the wings several times, apparently trying to help it start to fly. It is as we can imagine being the least of these that we can begin to experience the anguish of poverty or deprivation. It is as we are able to identify with the oil-soaked shorebird and the bewildered moose and the stranded polar bear that they come to embody our environmental concerns. And accompanying our sense of compassion, often at variance with our self-focused aims, is our haunting sense that things should be fair. So the sex chapter, I do the whole Mendel thing. I don't do it with peas, I do it with cats, but I get genes and alleles and everything, and I make my reader figure it out yet again. But what is also very important in eukaryotic sex is that, as we'll develop in a few minutes, is that the offspring are now have to be nurtured. They don't come out full form. They come out as seeds or as embryos, and the multicellular organisms all nurture these offspring by cocoons and seed coats and nests and uteruses and all sorts of other ways to keep the next generation going. We've thus far considered two ways to think about caring for others. We've acknowledged our deep genetic homology with all of life, and the affinity, the fellowship that emerges from that knowledge. We've also celebrated our capacity to experience empathy with other creatures and respond to their concerns as our own. And now we encounter our biological imperative to nurture our offspring, sacrificing, if need be, our lives on their behalf. It seems likely that the emotions evoked when we absorb our evolutionary affinity with other creatures and when we are infused with compassion will turn out to map closely onto the pathways that drive our basal, parental, and nurturing instincts. Emotions that generate such feelings as tenderness and warmth and protection, a protectiveness. These same emotions extend to our understanding that the Earth, the planetary matrix, must be nurtured as well. Intimacy. And may I say that our pictures of the bonobos were taken by Marion Berkner there in the front. So intimacy entails the fact that in many lineages, there are parent child interactions, as these two albatross are male and female, and they love their baby, and that we also have intimate relationships with our siblings and with our friends and with our non-human friends, our dogs and cats and so on. And these are wonderful, but they're also fraught and complicated and mortal, and there are lots of things about them that are challenging. Given the complications of human-style intimacy, an enormous attraction of the theistic religions has been that they offer the opportunity for intimate relationship with a deity or deities. Indeed, they often suggest that the most stable, fruitful outlet for intimacy is with the divine. These relationships can be abstract as in indigenous prayers to cosmic concepts like the Great Spirit or the Earth Mother. Or they can be intensely personal, as in the devotion accorded to Krishna in some Hindu traditions. But in the end, such faith isn't available to me. I can't go there. I lack the resources, perhaps, to render my capacity for love and my need to be loved to supernatural beings. And so I have no choice but to pour these capacities and needs into thick relationships with human and non-human beings, fragile and mortal and difficult as they can sometimes be. Earthly intimacy is a gift. It fills our lives with experiences of loving and being loved in all sorts of beautiful and fulfilling ways. So, all those single-celled organisms that are most abundant on the planet, they don't have to die. They can die, you can boil them or whatever, but their usual modus is to grow and then divide in two, and then grow and divide in four, and they just keep going. They're sort of one-man bands, if you will. The multicellular organisms, like us and like the plants shown here, have a different strategy. The germ line, as it's called, that goes to the next generation, is segregated from the somatic line, like the leaves and the stalks in these plants, or like our bodies in animals. And the point of the soma is to make sure that the germline gets transmitted. And in order to do that, it can just figure out anything, because it doesn't matter what it does, it's going to die. And the germline is what's going to keep the idea of that plant or animal going. So our brains, and hence our minds, are destined to die with the rest of the soma. And it is here that we arrive at one of the central ironies of human existence, which is that our sentient brains are capable of experiencing deep regret and sorrow and fear at the prospect of our own deaths. Yet it was the invention of death, the invention of the germ-soma dichotomy, that made possible the existence of our brains. Sex without death gets you single-celled algae and fungi and protists. Sex with a mortal soma gets you the rest of the eukaryotic creatures. Death is the price paid to have oaks and clams and geese and grasshoppers. And death is the price paid to have human-style consciousness, to be aware of all of that shimmering awareness and all that love. My somatic life is the wondrous gift wrought by my forthcoming death. So here's the human evolutionary tree. Common ancestor at the bottom, giving rise to orangutans, and then another common ancestor giving rise to gorillas. The dashed line shows the common ancestor between the human and the two other kinds of apes, the chimpanzees and the bonobos, that actually diverged later. But about 7 million years ago, we're now million, not billion, notice, the human hominid lineage took off and gave rise to species like Australopithecus and Homo erectus and stuff that you've probably heard something about, and finally wound up in modern times with Homo sapiens. And what is really important is all of this evolution happened in Africa. The multiple human migrations out of Africa began only 100,000 years ago, and the European migrations only 54,000 years ago. And those migrants were all fully Pan-African. Geoffrey Miller, the author of a wonderful book called The Mating Mind, says it well. It should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. All of the significant evolution in our species occurred in populations with brown and black skins living in Africa. At the beginning of hominin evolution 7 million years ago, our ape-like ancestors had dark skins just like chimps and gorillas. When modern Homo sapiens showed up 300,000 years ago, we still had dark skins. When brain sizes tripled, they tripled in Africans. When sexual choice shaped human nature, it shaped Africans. When language, music, and art evolved, they evolved in Africans. Lighter skins evolved in some European and Asian populations long after the human mind evolved its present capacities. Afrocentrism is an appropriate attitude to take when we are thinking about human evolution. Our fully shared, fully ligated humanity, our deep kinship, is a foundational concept, and when absorbed, a potent counterforce to systemic and structural racism. And lastly, morality and eco-morality. I talk about human-to-human interactions, and then I talk about eco-morality, how we relate to the earth. The Senegalese conservationist Baba Diom summarizes the foundational tenets of eco-morality. In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand. And we will understand only what we are taught. We have lifted up earlier our deep inborn affinity with the natural world. Baba Diom calls us to interweave this sensibility with our deepening knowledge of the natural world, creating narratives and teaching that help all of us understand what it is that we love, and then to insist that its sacred presence be conserved for future generations. So I don't know whether you have any. I guess we're being streamed, so I'm supposed to stay here. I don't know whether you have any questions, comments, thoughts that you'd like to share, but go for it. Maybe you're all just hungry and want to go home.
There was a question from Professor Clark asking if around 6:30, who wrote the poem that you had?
Oh, that was Mary. I only read one poem. There's lots of poems in the book, but that was Mary Oliver.
Oh, yay. Yeah. And
Poet laureate of Religious Nature.
all right. And
Yes.
So that was a great talk. It was really fun.
Thank you.
I'm curious why you use the word religion rather than philosophy, because religion has, you say early on, no supernatural, no faith, none of those things that are considered sort of key to religion. So why do you feel the need to use the word religion rather than philosophy, say?
Okay, well, philosophy to my mind is the interpretive part. So if you remember at the beginning, we have a story and then we interpret the story. So philosophy or existential understanding of it goes there. But philosophers are the ones who will quickly tell you that emotions, feelings, all that sort of stuff isn't part of what they do. They analyze. And so analysis is great. I'm all for it. I'm a scientist. I do it all the time. But a religious orientation, I would say, also has the spiritual and this moral component to it that is an addition to the interpreter. Does that work for you?
No.
Okay. There are a lot of people who are very, really hate the R word, okay? And maybe you're one of them. I've elected to use it. It means to bring together, to ligate, and it speaks to what it is that I'm trying to talk about. If somebody doesn't like to use the religious word, there are other groups. Some people call themselves spiritual naturalists, okay? I see spirituality as part of being religious, not the whole shebang. And so spiritual naturalist is kind of missing a lot of things in my mind. But it doesn't matter. I mean, what I'm really most focused on, as you can probably tell, is understanding the story, taking it in, loving it, feeling a part of the evolutionary process, getting in touch with one's own criticality. And then, if you call that religious or if you call that philosophical, it's not that important as far as I'm concerned. So.
First, thank you. I'm a total convert. I'm so impressed by this.
Thank you, sweetheart.
My question is, how does this framework respond to the new gender identity issue that we have in the world?
Well, humans are complicated. And sexual development is complicated. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on to create these particular genders. And it's perfectly clear that in humans, and there are examples of course, of homosexual behavior in lots of other animals as well. The bonobos, the females copulate 10 times a day. They love it. And so it just, my interpretation of it is that that sexual differentiation and development and so on usually works in the standard way, but sometimes it doesn't. And I think that people who are either attracted by the same sex or people who feel that they're in the wrong body and want to be a different gender, it's probably always been going on in human history. And it's just that now there's enough openness that we're talking about it, and people who felt that way are now actually able to act on it. Does that work?
Yeah, very nice talk.
Thank you.
Are you familiar with theories of human evolution beginning on Southeast Asia, South Asia, China? Have you looked into this one?
You'll have to give me the link. I think it all happened in Africa.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of challenging theories. A lot of Chinese academics are looking into this now. Professor Shui Hong is a famous Chinese evolutionary biologist.
Okay, well, I would love to
Yeah,
read it.
yeah.
You can find my, I have a Worcester EDU address on Google. You'll find it easily. Just if you could send me the link, I'd be very happy to read it, but I'm not familiar with it. I'm suspicious. But
So it's good to have more knowledge.
I'm suspicious. I mean, there was lots of migration into Asia, and not just by Homo sapiens, but Homo erectus 3 million years ago wandered all over Asia. So you have to kind of figure out what you mean by human.
Hi, thank
Hi.
you for that talk. Very, very interesting.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about your evolution, let's say, of your thoughts? Did you ever practice a religion or atheism, or how do you get to this?
Yeah, well, if you buy the book, and there are going to be, Shane was supposed to say at the beginning that the books will be for sale at the end. Oh, they're already, okay. I give some biography, but basically my father was actually ordained a Methodist minister, but then gave it up and became a professor of the history of religion. So he became very interested in why people are religious. And so it was sort of, in my ambiance, although as a kid I wasn't paying much attention to it. But the question came back to me after I was, fully ensconced as a professor. Doing research in the laboratory, I just happened upon this question and I thought, that's interesting. And then Loyal Rue, whom I've quoted, actually was the first for me to propose that we had this new large story that was fully as exciting as anything in the traditions, and that it was a great candidate for having religious responses to it. And I'm very careful in the book, careful is the wrong word, I am very respectful and in fact in awe of the existing religious traditions. They're part of our culture, they're part of nature, they're part of, they're not, I don't push them aside. I'm not a four horseman type of person saying that these religions are stupid. They're not. They have great wisdom in them and great understanding. It's just that this works better for me.
Thank you.
I have kind of a similar question to the gender question, but kind of in a different way. First of all, I really resonated with this. I used to call myself a neo-pagan materialist, but this seems like a similar idea. I was a philosophy student, so.
Okay, so. You'll have to, you guys can talk.
Yeah, but I guess the question I have is like, how do you, in terms of like essentialism, sometimes I have difficulty, especially I love animals so much, but then sometimes they treat each other really horribly, or they do things I really have a hard time approving of, right? So, and then people want to say, because humans are animals and certain things are natural, that means they're right. So, kind of this idea of like, is something because it's natural, is it necessarily right? I guess, and I just want your opinion.
I'm totally with you. Humans do horrible things, and as do animals. Plants are nice in that regard. It all comes, a lot of it can be traced to what ancestors have done, and in the end, we all either eat or are eaten. Right? So there's that's a piece of the whole. In chapter 12 on human evolution, I work a great deal with the concept of domestication, which I think is really an important one that a lot of philosophers are not talking about, that humans actually self-domesticated. That whereas chimps are, prone to rage and everything, and humans who are prone to rage, we pick them up in paddy wagons and take them to jail if they kill somebody, right? So we have laws against that. But the reason that we can have the cultures that we do and as much coherence as we have is because we are not so reactive. We do get mad, but we bottle it in. We don't, kill somebody. And this self-domestication, interestingly, has also occurred in the bonobos. They are also not prone to reactive aggression, whereas the chimpanzees are very prone to it. Usually the males, and usually in sexual or hierarchy context. So, it's the natural world. It's not red in tooth and claw. Everybody has to fit in. That's the mantra. It's not being fit, it's fitting in. And humans have figured out in our cultural context, with our symbolic language, with the structures of the societies that we put together, how to, be nice to one another most of the time. There's unfortunately another thing that we do called proactive aggression, which these are distinctions that I got from Richard Wrangham. Proactive aggression is when you, or usually a team of you, goes after somebody in revenge or to make money or something like that. And this proactive aggression is particularly toxic when it applies to tribes and nations, and everybody is demonizing another. And usually very much built into that is some sort of xenophobia, some sort of racism, where the other is characterized as being less and therefore being deserving of punishment. And so we have a long way to go, but I think that understanding how we evolved and understanding the non-human apes that we have to think about and study is helping us understand ourselves better.
What about ritual? Does ritual have a place?
Oh, ritual's wonderful. Yeah. So it usually ritual is usually associated with evoking spiritual responses. So gratitude, awe, humility, they're all very much built into the ceremonies, not only of the monotheisms, but of course the pagan indigenous cultures as well. And music, art, all of those things elicit these kinds of spiritual responses. Is that what you were getting at?
I guess, I mean, it seems like ritual is something that humans just have a proclivity to, we create it, but this as an alternative to religion or traditional religions, I just wondered, I mean, religions seem to have built-in ritual that's not just a conscious response to something beautiful, but like a collective agreement that we're going to do it this way, and these are the
Right, and then these rituals usually, center around the story in some way. We are having this, let's do Easter, or or communion, drinking the blood of Christ. I mean, these are all ways that the persons who are in these religions get to experience the story.
But members of this
Oh, do we have religions?
You have
Do we have rituals? Yeah, walking in the woods. I mean, that's experiencing nature. I mean, so there are, someone in the back was talking about being a neo-pagan. There are lots of groups. If you go online, you can find almost anything, of course, on any topic. But there are people who will do something like take the pagan stories, but they call themselves atheo-pagans. You were calling yourself a materialistic pagan, but it's the same difference. Where they are loving the ritual and the fact that the pagan gods and persons are very nature-based and embedded, and so they can take in those stories and sit around campfires and do all of that. That's another way of having the nature experience. The indigenous peoples, of course, it's all about nature because that's where they lived, and so all of their ceremonies are very nature oriented.
Let's give another round of applause for Dr. Ursula Goodenough.
Beautiful question. This is my very first bookstore event, and I am very heartened.
We do have copies available for sale at the desk, and we will do the signing right here as soon as I can move up you of this projector things.
What are you working on?
Ursula, okay, when you walk in,
Absolutely. I certainly did. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. That was great. Thank you.
I just finished.
Oh, we just did a climbing book. Ursula was in charge of volume 1, and so I think it's like ready for the second one.
I brought.
I saw it. Hello. Hey, Jig. I'm gonna guess it.
Oh, sure. Maybe so, Robin, you want to pick this? It won't be so weird. Pardon me. No more flagella. Flagella are out.
We're not saying that word anymore.
Other times when she's talking about this yesterday was how like the consequences of growing up. Pretty much.
How's Marilyn doing?
Oh, yeah, that's so sorry.
So what I'm doing is I'm writing the name to you. And then reading the
That works.